Hello and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana and thank you for taking some of your time today to watch one of my orchid videos. This one is going to be a repot of a reed stem epidendrum orchid by the name of Kagaribi, and I think that's probably a trade name. But in addition to being a repot, it's also kind of an SOS situation. So let me give a little bit of background information here before we get started. So I've had this orchid about a year, and I repotted it last year into this pot, and it had an old bloom spike which had been cut, and it grew this reed last season. But over the winter, it was under the grow lights, and it had actually had a little bit of algae in the pot when I moved it in at the end of the growing season last year. And over the winter, the algae did not get out of control. But since I have put this orchid back outside the last few weeks, the algae in the pot has become almost a scary situation. So let's talk for just a little bit about algae in your orchid pots, because a little bit of it is not necessarily a bad thing. If you have algae in your orchid pot, it probably means that you're watering well, you're fertilizing well, there's plenty of aeration in your orchid pot, the humidity is good. So a little bit of algae can actually indicate good growing conditions. And you'll often find more algae in orchid pots in commercial nurseries just because of the growing environment, and you'll have less of an algae problem if you're growing in a home environment. But this algae is now out of control for this orchid. So what happens when the algae gets out of control? Because a little bit is okay until it gets out of control and it's not okay. So what happens is that the algae can begin to cut off the air circulation from the roots of the orchid. And the algae, while it's not parasitic to the orchid, it will cause the media to become acidic more quickly. And orchid roots typically don't like acidic media. And then once that algae breaks down, and the bark begins to break down because of the higher acidity, then that's an invitation for bacteria to form inside your pot. It's an invitation for mold to grow inside your pot. And fungus gnats really love algae in orchid pots, so it attracts fungus gnats as well. So a little bit is fine. You don't have to be in a hurry to address it. But once it starts to look like this, it's pretty much gotta go. So we are going to repot this reed stem epidendrum today into a fresh pot. I'm not even going to attempt to clean this one. It's going straight in the trash can. And then, it's losing this right here. So I will be figuring out how to cut this off. It may very well end up that we go into a slightly smaller pot, because I have a feeling some of this root system is probably gone. So I'm going to have a smaller root system, so it can probably stand to be in a smaller pot. Reed stem epidendrums are not epiphytic orchids like many other orchids are. They are either more terrestrial or lithophytes, which means that they grow on rocks. But you can put them in a regular orchid mix as long as it's light and airy and there's enough circulation to the roots. They do tend to like a bit more water during the growing season, so they can get thirsty when they're growing. So I'm going to be using orchid bark, but then I'm going to be adding some sponge rock to give that little bit more extra aeration and lightness to the potting media. All right, so let's take this out and see how bad it really is on the inside. There's even algae growing on the plastic tag. Oops, and you know, this one has not bloomed for me, so it was out of bloom when I purchased it, and I've had it about a year, and it has not bloomed. But I suppose the root system could be worse. Okay, I think this was overpotted as well. Unless when I potted it last year, the root system was just far more extensive. But if you look inside the pot, like right along here, it's just slimy green. As well as on this side. This side may even be a bit worse. All along right here. Okay, so this is just, you know, I'm not going to reuse this. This is just full of algae, which we don't want, and all of this old media, even though it's just a year old, you know, I don't want to propagate that algae into the new pot. So, very, very easy to get off the old media here. And we'll have a look in just a second how this grows. Okay, so there's a bit of a kind of a rhizome here. So it starts here, and then each successive growth is coming this direction. So this is the oldest of the reeds. So I'm going to clip this off, and I have pre-flamed these cutters. Okay. So now this is clipped away. None of these roots were viable. They were all very papery and thin, soggy. Okay, so that's gone. Good news here is that this new growth is putting down some new roots right here. These roots are, some of them are a bit papery. Let's see. So we'll just trim away the part that's obviously dead. And just because it's black doesn't mean it's dead. Go ahead and feel each one before you trim it. If it has substance, leave it. If it is papery, soggy, or just a thread, like this one, it can be removed. And there's an ant from outside crawling on me. Yeah, so that's not too bad actually. Okay, so we are going to give this a really good spray with hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide will get rid of the algae that's on the roots. And you might think, well, would it have been possible to just leave it in the pot that it was in and pour 3% hydrogen peroxide into the pot, and maybe that would have cleaned it up? Well, probably not, because it would have been difficult to get to all of it. It would have wasted a lot of hydrogen peroxide, and the pot still probably would not have been clean. All right, so let's have a look. This is going to be perfectly fine. Now, I came from a pot size this huge, which was way over potted. You know, they're terrestrial orchids, they're lithophytes, they need air to the roots. So we're going to put a little bit of bark down in the bottom. And you may not have seen many orchid growers downsize their pots, but in this case we definitely are. We're adding some extra sponge rock. Okay. And I do want the new roots to be close to the media. hopefully some of those existing roots will branch. We'll press down just the tiniest bit to help stabilize it in the pot, but not too much because you do not want to ruin the air spaces in between the bark, taking out some of these larger rock pieces that are almost bigger than the pot. Goodness. Okay, and we are going to need to put the stake back in because it's not particularly stable in this pot now. And we can use the same clip. Let's just do this down here. Remember, the hinge of the clip always fits up against the stake, and the arms of the clip wrap around the orchid. Okay, so let's get a little bit of this mess out of the way and see what our finished product looks like. Okay, so I am much happier with this repotting. We're gonna hope for more new growth this year. We're gonna hope for root development because this orchid could definitely stand to have a few more roots to support it. And I'm gonna give this a good drink of water, and hopefully the algae will stay out of this brand new pot with this new media. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you learned something new or enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and the subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you next time.